Okay, all right, so again. Okay, so let's get into it. So tell me about the class from today.
Yeah, well, it was my first class, so, and I'm so sorry, I forget the name of the lady that came to class, but she was able to stop thinking, which is always the main goal of the class. Like I was saying before, there's a lot of health benefits to the Buteyko method, which is, I teach essentially a synthesis of the Buteyko method and Taoist meditation, and there's wide-ranging health benefits because it increases oxygen at the cell level, but in terms of thinking, what it does is it allows people to relax out of thinking.
So this is a true breathing class.
Yes.
So, I mean, I had no idea, honestly, what to think.
Yep.
But I was not connecting that the meditation aspect,
Yeah, I mean, it's really actually very simple. Just, mindfulness as we're taught generally is, comes from the Buddhist tradition, and they don't change how they breathe. They just observe the breathing without changing it. And most of us are breathing too much already. We're breathing more than we need to, and that means there's a lot of thoughts, and it's pretty hard to not get caught up in the thoughts. And so by gently and gradually reducing the level of breathing, what happens is more oxygen gets released from the brain, and then there's less random, what they call, in the medical literature, they call it asynchronous and spontaneous neural firing, or self-generated thinking. Basically, your thoughts think themselves, and you don't have much to say in the matter, right? I mean, this is how people go about their day. There's just thoughts always, yeah. And so when you, part of why that happens is low oxygenation of the brain. So when you breathe a little bit less, CO2 levels go up, oxygen can be released more easily from hemoglobin, so you get more oxygenation in the cells of the brain, and then you can relax out of the thinking because the brain's more highly oxygenated. That's like the short version. So yes, by making your breathing subtle and breathing a little bit less, you can learn how to relax out of thinking. And one way of thinking of it is that the breath is a mirror to the mind. So the more you're breathing, the more you're thinking. The less you're breathing, the less you're thinking.
So are you like consciously all the time thinking about how you're breathing? Or?
During the class or me in general?
Yeah, class.
Well, in the class, the first part of the class, since it's a two-way street, you can breathe less by reducing thinking, or you can reduce thinking by breathing less. So the first part, we focus on breathing just a little bit less than we feel like breathing. And if you hold that air hunger for a minute or so, you can reduce again, you can reduce further. And for some people, that's the easier way, is to reduce their breathing by relaxing out of it. And then the second part of the class, we do what's called meditating on the mind, which is, I have them ask themselves, where is my mind? And to look for their mind with their mind. And that naturally opens up a gap in thinking, which then in turn they will breathe less. And I like to use both methods because different people are, one is easier than the other for most people.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can breathe less and get the health benefits of that by thinking less, or you can think less and breathe less. It goes both ways.
Okay. So, because I'm like thinking about it some subconsciously, consciously almost, like being aware of how you're breathing.
Yeah. Basically, it's the only difference from this and what is generally called mindfulness is that you're relaxing. First, you relax the whole body, and that automatically reduces breathing by like maybe 10% because there's less tension in the body. And then you focus on just relaxing your abdomen and breathing just a little bit less than you feel like breathing, and generating a air hunger that is like you would feel if you went on a brisk walk, you're doing chores around the house. You want to generate that feeling while you're just sitting, and then that reduces thinking. And you can do that several times in a row. And when you practice it enough, then when you're going about your day and your mind is racing, you're driving somewhere, wherever you are, you can just you've learned the skill of like, oh, I can just like move my abdomen a little bit less, I can breathe a little bit less, and then I can relax out of whatever, racing thoughts I'm having.
Okay. And then this would be a good tool too, to like get into like actual meditation?
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole meditative technique in and of itself. There's a bunch of Taoist texts that talk about a practice called tuning the breathing, which is essentially reducing the level of breathing. If you think about it from a meditation perspective, it's a lot harder to notice thoughts. Like if you have a thought and there's barely a gap, it's a lot harder to not get caught up in thinking. But if you have 20, 30 seconds between thoughts, it's a lot easier to spot that thought, not get caught up in it. And yeah.
Okay, and then what were you telling me about the heart?
Oh yeah, I was saying that, so, this practice came about because I was, at the time, very interested in meditation, and I was interested in Taoist meditation specifically, and I found all of these texts that were talking about these subtle breathing methods, and somehow I came across a man by the name of Konstantin Buteyko, who was a Ukrainian physician in the Soviet Union, and he basically rediscovered these ancient breathing practices and applied them in a medical context in Russia. And he claimed that he could reverse 80% of chronic diseases that he saw in his practice through just this breathing method alone. And he trained thousands of physicians. He worked at the highest level of the Soviet Union, space program, KGB, Soviet Olympic athletes. And he claimed that he could do this. And I was skeptical about that. And yeah, I had a friend, I used to be a gunsmith, and I went to school with him. We worked together at a couple places, some gun shops in Texas. And he told me he had heart failure, and I was just starting to teach this. I'd been practicing it for years, and I was just starting to teach, and I was like, look, dude, I don't know if this is true, but this Russian physician who operated at the highest levels of the Soviet Union, he said heart disease, cancer, all these things could be cured by it. So yeah, my friend, he had heart failure, he was going into hospice, and I taught him about the method. He was pretty depressed, so we didn't talk that much, but he was researching it on his own. He was messaging me about it. He basically taught it to himself. Mm-hmm. And right around the time he was supposed to have died, he got out of hospice. His doctor said he's a medical miracle. His heart had shrunk by 30% or something like that. And he was like, he was really bad off. And I thought he was going to die for sure. And then, so I was like, oh, I guess the Russian guy was right, because all he did really was, interestingly, I don't know if he learned this from the Buteyko method, because there's differing ideas about it, but he saunaed a lot because he had so much swelling. Because and heart and kidney, he had kidney failure too. They usually go hand in hand together. Yep. And so he did a lot of sauna, which is a form, if you do nasal breathing, which he switched to breathing through his nose in the sauna, he was able to, that was like essentially like a Buteyko method, because he wasn't well enough to exercise. Okay. But he just switched to doing like all nasal breathing and doing nasal breathing in the sauna. And yeah, he still alive today. I got an update from him like a few months ago, and he continues to improve. I don't even think he's, like, when he first got out, it was like he didn't have heart failure, but he still had like low-grade heart disease. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure now he's not rated as having heart disease or kidney disease. And so this is probably like been 5 years since like the start of it or whatever. So yeah, like I said, I knew for sure that the method worked for meditation and for anxiety and being able to relax out of thinking. But then I saw someone, basically at death's door become, Western medicine says you can't do that. Right. So then all the other stuff that I've heard about it from, the Russian community of physicians that many of them still use this. Like, I haven't seen someone reverse cancer, but I don't see why they couldn't, because I saw heart failure, which is, lots of people come back from cancer. How many people come back from heart failure?
Right. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and from my healthcare background, I was a nurse for about 25 years. I would always, now, first of all, I'll be the first one to admit that I thought all of this stuff was just woo-woo.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Sure,
like,
sure.
We're all conditioned at some point, to some degree, I guess. But I would always say that it was, like, I knew if a patient was going to, like, I knew what their progress was basically going to be. Like, were they, especially in oncology, like, were they going to make it or were they not? Yeah. I cringed when doctors would give them a timeline. Yeah. Because and I didn't know why then. Like, I didn't understand the connection of the mind and body, but I every time that would happen, that's, the patient gave up.
Because they believe that, yeah.
And they gave up. So it was
Yeah.
amazing to me. I would know the minute they came onto to my floor if they were gonna leave and go home
Yeah.
or not, because just because of their mindset.
For
So like now that I've been able to see the connection, and I've come out of Western medicine, and it's not to poo-poo on Western medicine completely.
Sure.
There's a time and a place.
Yeah.
But like these things, I mean, this is
I agree. I
reality.
agree, yeah, and when I think about Western medicine, I think about there's like a lot of great strengths, but
Yeah.
there's also, the materialist paradigm is a huge problem, which, like, if you don't think about the mind-body connection, then giving someone that advice is fine, but like, it's a death sentence.
Right.
Because they look at you as an authority, you're telling them this is how it's gonna be, they just resign themselves to that, and then it becomes true. I like, in many ways, like, what I try to do is fuse the two, like use what's best about the materialist understanding of the body with what's best about the Eastern ideas about like energy and the mind's influence over the body.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the physician I was talking about, Konstantin Buteyko, he realized that he had rediscovered, like, it's not so. Yoga classes these days, like pranayama, that's not how pranayama was taught for thousands of years. In fact, it was a shift due to the influence of Western medicine on India that shifted pranayama towards hyperventilation techniques, which is generally what they are in classes now. Before that, it was all breath holding. It was basically increasing CO2 tolerance through holding your breath, whereas the Taoist approach is subtle breathing. So in subtle breathing is easier and it's safer because like holding your breath, there's dangers to it depending on certain health conditions. And so Buteyko focused more on the subtle breathing, but he realized, he was in Russia, they have yogis, they're right next to India and China. And he's like, oh, this is what, like they've been doing this for thousands of years. So he actually researched those practices, and he was well aware that that they had figured out the root cause of the illness was just, but he figured it out from a Western perspective, which is from the Western perspective, it's not like chi and prana are like subtle energies that at least for the most part our scientific instruments can't detect yet. But he knew it was about oxygen at the cell level, and he knew that when there's not enough oxygen at the cell level, mitochondria don't function. The power plant, that's the power plant for the whole body because it's the power plant for the cell.
Yep.
So he's realizing, you make the breathing subtle. Carbon dioxide allows oxygen to get released from hemoglobin more easily. You're getting more oxygen in the cell, and then all these chronic illnesses just go away because the mitochondria are functioning properly. So it's like the East is framing it in terms of subtle energy, and he's realizing what it does for blood gases. It doesn't mean there's not subtle energy, but it means at least from a Western medical perspective, you can explain to someone like this is actually literally what's happening in your body, and that's settled science. Even though I don't think Western medicine totally doesn't really accept the Buteyko method. I think there's some research on anxiety and asthma, if I remember correctly, but like there obviously any reports out of Russia, case studies of people reversing cancer or heart failure are not taken seriously. But even though he did, like I said, he operated at the highest levels of the Soviet Union, he trained thousands of physicians. They have been treating people like with this method since the 50s or 60s. So
I wish we could see a change in our medical school curriculum in the United States to at least incorporate some of this stuff because it really, I'm a walking example. I came out of healthcare with a dozen diagnoses and half a dozen prescriptions and did some, not necessarily breathing classes, but I did some like EMDR and brain spotting. Right? Like I was connected the two, and I thought to myself, like, I'm a nurse, like I should have known the body-mind connection, but I didn't, and I think many people don't. And the minute those two connected for me, it was like a whole different world opened up, and I instantly my health flipped. It did a 180, and it's astounding to me that these things we're symptom focused in Western medicine. We're reactive. We're not
Yeah.
root cause centered, and we don't focus enough on prevention.
Sure.
And it would just be awesome. But if the very least we can teach people
Yeah.
these things, which is
Yeah,
amazing.
for sure. I mean, you know, from the Eastern perspective, all physical diseases are manifestations of the mind, you know? It's like Carl Jung said, the gods have become our diseases. So it's like whatever's going on in your body is essentially the subconscious mind, or at least in part what the subconscious mind is made of. So all your physical health problems, at least from a Buddhist perspective, the only fully healthy being is Buddha, because he's sorted out his own mind, and that's why his body is in good condition. And the rest of us, we have some stuff to work at, you know, mostly below the level of consciousness. And when that stuff clears up, then the body stuff starts to clear up.
Yeah, I just read somewhere the other day. There's like 7 layers of consciousness or something like that. But I don't think I've reached the top yet.
Yeah.
I'm getting there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so one other quick question, like
Yeah.
what got you into this?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but one of my majors in college was philosophy, and that pretty quickly became disinterested in Western philosophy. And I was lucky to take a class on Taoism very early, and I was like, oh, this is not, like, Western philosophy is very analytical, logical. They almost want to turn it into like a math or a science. And I discovered Taoism, and I became very interested in Taoism, Buddhism, other Eastern philosophies. And I very quickly went from, I was a philosophy major, but what I actually, you know, majored in is more like comparative religion, and Eastern religions, essentially psychology. So I was interested in that. I became a gunsmith because, largely because some of my favorite philosophers had been tradesmen, and I had no interest in being a philosophy professor. I just knew what they were. I knew for me philosophy was more of like practice than reading and writing essays, and so I became a gunsmith because I figured a trade would be a way to like practice philosophy, and then I just kept reading and studying, and then somewhere towards the end of my gunsmithing career, what I talked about earlier, I was reading these Taoist meditation texts. I got really into meditation, was trying all the different kinds of meditation. I was really interested in Zen, and I got really interested in Zen is essentially Buddhism that went to China and got infected by Taoism. So it's kind of like a blend of Taoist and Buddhist thoughts. And so I was reading all these ancient, you know, Taoist texts, and I found this breathing method, and then somehow that led me to, I'd heard about the Buteyko method, and somehow like I stumbled on it, and I was like, oh, this guy figured out the science behind this. And interestingly, he had been an engineer, and he had, in World War II, I forget exactly what he was doing, but I think he was like repairing tanks and stuff, and I was like, oh, like I'm working on guns, this guy is like also working on machines. And he was disinterested with working on machines, so he went to medical school. And I was like, oh, this is kind of similar, because I'm kind of growing disinterested with machines, and I'm more interested in the body. And that's, you know, long story short, that's how I discovered his method. And what I did was, I wanted to really understand his method from a scientific perspective, but I had already been steeped in, you know, studying these Eastern practices for a long time. And what I realized was that from the Eastern view, a pranayama or any sort of breathing practices, their idea is that the mind is a manifestation of the winds or chi in the body. So that when you change how you breathe, you're altering your psychology. You're altering the subconscious mind.
Okay.
And so from the Eastern perspective, one way to summarize it, how the Tibetans put it, is that enlightenment happens when your winds are in your central channel, and your normal dualistic ego mind manifests from the side channels of the body. So all of these breathing practices are about getting the winds stabilized in the central channel, and in so doing, it purifies what we would call in the West is like the subconscious, the unconscious mind, and it also purifies like the factors that cause disease. So from the ancient yogic perspective, and this is in the text, the practice that Buteyko rediscovered through a scientific lens, they said it cures all disease. That's how it's framed, and it's also framed that way in the Taoist texts. But they're framing it from a perspective of you're changing the subtle energy, which is healing the mind, which is then in turn healing the body. And so I basically took Buteyko's scientific understanding, blended it with the Eastern psychology view about how energy works in the body, and that's how I came about doing this.
Awesome. So, I mean, really, you think like this is probably one of the biggest problems in the Western medicine world, that we are focused on the body only?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's Western medicine and even Western science generally did not catch up to the quantum revolution that happened in the 20th century. Quantum physics clearly demonstrated that consciousness has a direct effect on reality. Not just that, it's the substrate of reality. It's consciousness is primary, matter is secondary, and the Western science didn't catch up with that and stayed with the old model, which is that we live in like a cold, dead material universe that's essentially inanimate, and consciousness is a side effect of material, and is really about what comes first. Does mind come first, or does matter come first, right? And they take the view that matter comes first. Not only that, that's all that there is, and it makes total sense that they have taken the direction that they have. We don't have quantum medicine. We don't have real energy medicine. I mean, obviously there's lots of things like that, but we haven't scientifically focused on creating that, and that there needs to be like a quantum revolution in medicine at some point in time.
Yeah, we need a whole like curriculum redo.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, might change the direction of the flow of the money.
Yeah,
so,
certainly.
You know,
I mean, absolutely.
I don't know that that's gonna ever happen, but.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely right.
So do you operate like 24/7 consciously, like from a conscious?
It's really hard for me to describe my like inner experience, other than to say that. Yeah, it's really hard to describe.
I know, and this is so like the whole subconscious is so like interesting to me.
The best way to put it is that there's a way to see through the ego where you can't unsee it. And then it's not that you lose all sense of agency, but you lose the fear about making the wrong decision, because you realize like you're not making, like the universe is making all the decisions, right? And all of the tension and fear is related to the idea that you're a separate thing, you might make the wrong move, or the kind of psychological time trip that some other moment's gonna be better than this one, like, but there's not another moment, right? It's it's deceptively simple, right? It's like people like Eckhart Tolle, you know, there's lots of like kind of new age thinkers that reframe these like ancient ideas, but it's so deceptively simple that there isn't time. Time is like just manufactured, and the entire world system is geared around making you think that there is time, and that if you were to get something some other point in time would be better, or that you could like not have something that's happening right now, but it's happening right now, so how could you not have it, you know? So yeah, I would say that when you've fully seen through that, it's not like I don't have any thinking at all, but I'm certainly free from identification with it most of the time, and that's just like a natural consequence of seeing something that can't be unseen. You know?
Yeah, I do. I remember the first time my brain stopped when I was doing brain spotting, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's a nurse practitioner, and I said my brain's quiet for the first time ever.
Yeah.
And she goes, "Our brains are supposed to be quiet?"
Yeah.
I'm like, apparently.
Yeah.
It was like the most amazing feeling in the world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because this is like what I like to teach people,
Yeah.
right? And there's an interesting thing where, once you learn to look for your mind in a specific way, it's automatically quiet. But there's still kind of a subtle duality in it because you are still doing something. You're making an effort to shift attention, right? And that creates a kind of an uptight mindfulness where you're like constantly vigilant against thinking, you're looking for thinking. But if you stick with that long enough, there's a triple switch where you realize, oh, like I'm not actually doing that, right? It's at first it's like you think you're consciously doing it, and then it's so ingrained as a habit that you feel like thought, automatic movement to see the thought. But in both of those instances, you still feel like there's something separate that's doing something.
Yeah.
And then at some point in time, that creates enough tension of that uptight mindfulness where you're like, oh, like I'm not. You just let the mind do whatever it wants to do, and you don't try to do anything about it, and just let it move however it wants to move, and let it be quiet. There be a wave of thought. You're not really trying to manipulate it in any way.
That's good, because I definitely, I feel like I'm painfully aware, but I also recognize that I'm not. Like, I think that I'm pretty self-aware, but smart enough to know that chances are I'm not all the time, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And I struggle to, like, I go back and forth with the mind thing. And I want to get back to that, like, quiet, like, or acceptance stage. But it's also hard when you're, like, I love my solitude, but when I'm around so many people, it's very, I have a hard time not absorbing the energy.
I know what you mean. Yeah, oh, absolutely, for sure. Yeah, I guess, you know what, I think the trick is, and I can't tell you exactly how to do this, but what does happen eventually is you just realize whatever aversion isn't you. Like, if you, like, for instance, for me, like, I am very sensitive to other people's energy, and but I would just find myself not, like, I noticed that there's a part of me that wants to avoid people, to not be in that, and I just wouldn't dictate. And then even when I'm there, that part of me is still like, hey, like, I don't want to be here. And it's like, well, that's not what's happening. It's just not me that's pushing things away or grasping after things. Like, I'm just the one that, like, does regardless of that. It's like, as long as you're not getting pushed around by that, you're just, like, doing what you want to do, actually want to do, or whatever, like, naturally flows into experience.
Okay.
I mean, that's the one I think of it is, in the West, disassociation's like a negative word, but there's a way to see into the nature of reality where you're disassociated from grasping an aversion in a way that, the ego can never consciously, it always it by its nature wants some things, doesn't want some things. But if you can see that you're not the thing that is pushing experience away or grasping after experience, then you're already free from it, even if it's still there doing that, Do
you think once you recognize the ego and can separate from it, then you're separate from it forever, or?
That's a really interesting question. And, there's different kind of approaches to, in the West, we have this, it's all about psychological development. It's about building up the ego, or in the case of Jungian psychology, it would be like growing out of the ego into something that's larger than the ego. And then in the East, it's very clearly about, like, disassociating or seeing through it clearly to be an illusion. And they're not entirely two mutually exclusive things. Like, there's a way to blend these, and I would say that's kind of difficult to do, but it can be done. So, like, it's not, because for instance, Eastern spiritual practices can produce people who have a relatively high level of spiritual insight, but are not well integrated and act out. I think we've seen that over the last few decades. There are spiritual teachers that have legitimate insight, and then they do like pretty terrible things, right? And you could also be like very well psychologically developed and not have insight into like that clear insight into the spiritual side of things, into like recognizing the absolute. So I think the sweet spot is like somewhere in the middle. There's a guy named John Welwood who I really like, who wrote a book called I think it's On the Awakening of Psychology, that's really about the idea that Western psychological ideas and Eastern spiritual ideas are not mutually exclusive things, and that for many Westerners, having insights into awareness that the East are pointing at, they still have personal problems, and they need to work on those problems at a psychological level. And I think that's true. So I think that here's what I'd say is that the Eastern systems that I like the most they're not trying to destroy the ego, they're trying to bring it into alignment with the awareness. So like there's a really good book called The Secret of the Golden Flower that is about this idea of your conscious mind still needs to function, but it just needs to practicing that resting in awareness, and that practice as it grows reshapes the ego in beneficial ways so that it's in alignment with the larger awareness. So even in the East, there's different approaches to that, and I would say that yeah, I mean, spiritual practice does not automatically like end all of your problems, so that like Western psychotherapeutic approaches can be very beneficial. And I really am a huge fan of Jung, although I would say, on both sides, Jungian psychology is very interesting, and there's parts about it that are effective, and there's things with it I think that are less effective, but he misses, he didn't really understand. He wrote forwards to a lot of the early Eastern texts, like The Secret of the Golden Flower and Tibetan Book of Great Liberation, and I think one of the Zen books, I forget which one, maybe one of D.T. Suzuki's books, but he didn't quite get it, and he kind of thought meditation, Eastern style meditation, like formless contemplation, he thought it was dangerous to Westerners, and so anyway, I'm rambling, but
no, it's good though.
I think that there's a way to work with, and I would say that like even the Eastern systems, not all of them are non-duality alone. Like there's alchemical systems, like the Taoist system's alchemical, like the tantric systems of India, the tantric Buddhism. Like you can think of it this way. Like Tibetan Buddhism, Dzogchen or Ati Yoga is considered the highest teaching, and it's basically just trying to point you to the nature of awareness, see through like the illusion of the ego, and that's what it focuses on. But the tantric practices of tantric Buddhism are about the energy body, and they're about working with the winds of the body, and that enlightenment comes from having the winds stabilized in the central channel. So they're using the body as the mechanism of enlightenment. And I would say that like Jungian psychology, the idea of like integrating what Jung called uniting the opposites, is a kind of an energy work on a psychological, conceptual level that's similar. Like, you can think of it two ways. One way is like going directly at like the source of awareness, and the other way is working at a conceptual level and working at a level of the body and the energy systems in the body to blend the yin and yang energies together. And I think those also are not mutually exclusive things. Like you could do both of those simultaneously. So, and one of those would be working with the ego. The one where it's the alchemical approach, it's like the ego's getting blended with something else to balance it out.
Okay, so not like killing it off.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I don't think killing it off works for some people.
Yeah.
It does, and this is a thing that's like different for different people. Some people see through it clearly, and I think probably if they're like well adjusted and don't have a lot of trauma in their life, they can just do that, and that's functional for them. And some people need a little bit more complex approach that has to do with the subconscious mind and the energy in the body and working with the ego and uniting it with self, something like that.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
All of this stuff is just so interesting.
Yeah, it is to me too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
when you say Eastern or Western meditation, that's like our standard
well, I would say
Yeah.
usually what I'm talking about is mindfulness,
Mhm.
which is comes out of the Buddhist tradition, and it's just observing your breathing, and I think it's a great practice, and if you really go hard on it, you can build attention, and building attention can be really helpful for actually having the non-dual insight, but it's also a subtle trap, because if you just do mindfulness, because they don't teach you in the West that there are more advanced practices that you can graduate to.
Yeah.
So if you're just building attention, you're never going to have the non-dual insight. Oh, that's not true. I mean, it can arise naturally and does, but I think there are people who probably have meditated for a long time who could they've built enough attention that they could graduate to receiving pointing out instructions or meditating on the mind directly, and then they could have that insight. And in the West, we teach it like a health practice, which it's not. It can be taught as a health practice, but we're losing kind of. It's a preparatory practice for insight, and how to actually bring insight about is. There's lots of different methods, there's koans, Dzogchen, they actually just tell you, they just point it out to you, but usually that's actually different. Some Dzogchen teachers do not engage in large preparation, and some do. And anyway, my point is I'm rambling, but I think that mindfulness should be thought of as a preparatory practice for other modes of realizing insight into the nature of awareness.
And then, so last question,
Yeah.
because I know I could go on forever, but
No.
so what does that next step look like? Like for somebody who's
Been doing mindfulness for a long time? It takes a lot, the way I work with people is intuitive. My deal is I'm a nerd on spiritual technologies, and I've used many of them. I mean, these days I do very little. I basically do some sky gazing. I rarely even meditate, but I've used tons of them. And so what I do when I meet with someone is I get a feel for what I get an intuitive inspiration for what might work best for them, because there's so many. I'll say one that is I think really powerful and is slept on in the West is koans, which is you just repeat a question in your head, and the question cannot be answered. So what it does is basically you ask this question over and over again, and you just keep asking it, and it creates this sort of tension in the left hemisphere ego, because it can't answer the question. And at some point it short circuits, and there's a satori, there's an awakening experience, and it just works. I mean, it's worked, for Zen and Chan traditions for a very long time, and it's really simple. All you have to do is ask a question in your head over and over, and eventually it detonates and you have an awakening experience.
And you don't try to answer it? Naturally, I feel like I would.
You will try to answer it, but you
Okay.
can't answer it. It's an unanswerable question.
Okay.
And that what it does is eventually it creates so much tension in sometimes it's been described in energetic terms that it somehow detonates the left hemisphere ego, because it's just an unanswerable question, and then you're left with this spacious satori insight into awareness,
And then the acceptance that it's okay
yeah.
to not
And
answer.
in the Zen tradition, they have different, sometimes some schools work through tons of different koans. You do it with a teacher. There's some people work with a koan for one single koan for their whole life. So there's different approaches to it, but it's something that works, And I'd say another approach that works, we're talking about Dzogchen. I feel like this is the MMA era of spirituality, because there's all these different traditions, and I have the highest respect for the Dzogchen tradition, and Dzogchen, they give you pointing out instructions, which is they point out the nature of awareness and you recognize it there if you're ready for that. And I think that, you know, like I said earlier, some teachers don't give any preparation, they just give pointing out instructions. I think they're more likely to land if someone has sustained or has attained a relatively high level of attention where they can rest in a thought-free state for a long period of time. So my approach, if I were to give someone pointing out instructions, I would have them do a lot of actual meditation first, and then I would give them the instructions when I thought they were ready, which is how a lot of the Dzogchen teachers do it as well. But yeah, it kind of really depends on every person. Should have like a different approach. And for some, like for instance, a lot of the things that worked for me, I noticed were not things that my wife was interested in. So I had to learn. I learned a bunch of things that I didn't really know about to find things that were helpful for her, you know. And or rather, I would say that actually a lot of the stuff that she uses are things that I used, but I didn't use as much as you know. I like kind of toyed with them and then put them away, and then I was like, oh, I think I did this before. I think like you should try this, you know. But yeah, I mean, there's one that I really like called Tuma. That, remember we were talking about the side and the central channels? Well, Tuma works to get the winds directly into the central channels and like rather forcibly, and can create these really high bliss states. And I don't teach it to anyone because I think it's kind of dangerous, and like I basically learned it on my own, and it worked for me. But after I read the text more, I was like, oh, I see how this could like be destabilizing, or it can actually cause health issues. And in Eastern terms, they say it burns up your karma. So like accidents can happen, or like weird things happen in your external world or whatever. But it's kind of like Wim Hof. The difference is like Wim Hof, they hold the breath on the exhale, and in this one you don't hyperventilate quite as much. But you hold your breath on the inhale and you push your belly out, and sometimes you like scrunch your perineum, you engage bandhas. And what it does, it makes the energy go up to the top, and what it feels like is DMT. Like if anyone's ever done DMT before, it feels like you're doing DMT, but it only lasts for like 20 seconds or something like that. And you feel like this inherent bliss, and it tends to last for a while after you do it. I don't do it anymore, but it was extremely helpful to me. I don't teach it really. But if I met someone who I felt like, oh, like this person should do Tumo, I would teach them Tumo. So yeah, there's so many different.
Is it fair to say you're almost controlling your breathing with some of this, and to not control your mind? Like,
yeah,
does that make sense?
For sure. But yeah, I mean, there's so many different, you know, interesting practices. And, you know, I haven't talked about this yet, but one of the big things I'm into is the idea that the right hemisphere is essentially omniscient. It's like atemporal, non-local. It can see like all the timelines, and then if you let that guide you, like the word guardian angel, which is a concept that's in almost every culture, is actually your own spirit, and it's actually located or emanates from the right hemisphere. And then if the ego, left hemisphere ego, turns to that and allows itself to be led, that will actually take care of your psychological development, like what you need to do for work, spiritual. It'll take care of all that stuff for you, because you just have this inner guide that has instead of being locked into the space-time dimension, can see, you know, outside of space-time, can see all the different paths your life can take, and wants to help you, but you have to be receptive to it. So I try, that's like my number one thing, is I try to get people in touch with their inner teacher, because it can teach them better than I could ever teach them, you know.
Is that separate from intuition, or the same?
It's related to intuition. I would say that when you're experiencing intuition, it's just guidance from that right hemisphere intelligence.
Is this where like the whole psilocybin microdosing kind of comes in, and you're connecting?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one way to think of it is the right hemisphere, and we know this from like the CIA Project Gateway. Like they use binaural beats. Have you heard about this? Henny Singh? So they use binaural beats to sync the hemispheres, and then they could remote view things at in the future, in the past, where they're not near, right? So the CIA did this for a long time, and there's all this literature from the program out there, and so we know it's about hemisphere synchronization is how they did it. So the right hemisphere just isn't bound by linear space and time, but the left hemisphere needs to be, because you're not effective. Like if you were just, for instance, like what the right hemisphere does is it has all this information, but it keeps it from you so you can function. Because, for instance, if you're tripping all the time and you're seeing all this energy and you're feeling it one with all reality, you wouldn't be able to function in the world, right? So we need this view to be functional, but we also, it's helpful to get some information from that view, like more than most of us are usually getting. And yeah, I mean, it's what produces your dreams. It's what Carl Jung called the unconscious. I wouldn't say it's the entire unconscious, but it's kind of like the gateway. Like your right hemisphere, it's not bound by this view of reality. It knows what everything that's going on in your body. It knows what's going to happen tomorrow, and it can guide you into
Are we
how
supposed to be connected to it?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a corpus callosum, so we're physically, both hemispheres are already connected. I would just say, like, what happened is that in the past, humans were much more connected to this, and actually usually experienced it as a guiding intelligence that would tell them what to do. And that as the left hemisphere ego became more active, more self-conscious, and more engaged in repetitive thinking, it just kind of drowned that intelligence out, and most of us are not very well connected to it now. Yeah, there's tons of books. I was just telling my friend earlier that, like, if you want a really good scientific view, the books of Ian Gilchrist are really good. And this is all about split brain patients and people who have strokes. So they know that there's like two different personalities in your head, completely different. And most people are just locked into the one right hand, left hemisphere personality. And the works of Julian Jaynes are really good on this. And there's a really cool book called Daemon, The Guide to Your Secret Self, where he goes really in depth on the psi ability and the idea that it's basically like a spiritual guide that, like, it knows what's going to happen in your life and can help you, like, avoid accidents. In many cases, it saves people's lives by doing these automatic things that, like, they don't know why they're doing them, but then they realize, like, a few seconds later that it saved their life. Really cool book.
Do you think that purposefully things are put out to keep us disconnected?
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I'd say the whole system is designed to keep us locked into this, samsaric, how's the word, how do I best describe this? There's essentially a cultural programming to turn us into slaves.
yeah.
That's what they want.
Yeah.
And they do that by getting us to take our fears seriously and to make us afraid of a lot of things. So if they can make
fear self.
yeah. So if they can get us conditioned to behave a certain way when we encounter fear, and then they make a bunch of things that make us afraid, they can control how we behave.
Fear controls.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I never put it in that perspective of, like, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere.
Once you see the world through the hemispheric differences, you'll never see it the same way.
What's a good book to learn more
Master
about?
in the Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. It's a very large book. He has some shorter books. I think one's called The Divided Mind. It's very short. He has a bunch of information on YouTube, and that's a very, very science-based. Like, he doesn't get into the psychic abilities of the right hemisphere. But yeah, The Master in the Emissary, and then the one that gets deeply into the psychic side of things is called Daemon, The Guide to Your Secret Self. And this is a thing that people don't really know, but, like, in all cultures, there's this idea of you have this double. You have this other version of you, and it's like your higher self, your guardian angel, whatever you want to call it. And literally, it's another personality on the other half of your brain, and for most of us, we're just totally disconnected to it, just disconnected from it. And that's part of why when I teach this is that in the CIA experiments, they use these binaural beats to synchronize the brainwaves, but this breathing practice does the same thing. And I didn't talk about this earlier when we discussed the Buteyko method. Part of why he's not taken seriously in the West is he developed a very high level of carbon dioxide tolerance, and he trained others to do so, and he noticed that they all got psychic abilities. He had psychic abilities, they had psychic abilities. That's why he worked with the KGB in the psychic spying. And so it's like the CIA was using these binaural beats, which are, these headphones, But Buteyko was rediscovering an ancient method, which your brain's just like that all the time if you do it enough, because it's synchronized. Cutting down the left hemisphere chatter means the right hemisphere can communicate more to the left hemisphere because it's not being talked over all the time. And there's actually a few years ago, the CIA declassified a document where they said Konstantin Buteyko had perfected ESP. And so, in that, the way he perfected it is that this breathing technique allows the hemispheres to synchronize.
Wild.
Yeah, it is wild stuff.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the amount of research done by the United States and the Soviet Union on psychic abilities, and the fact that both of them realized it was about hemispheric coherence, and that the right hemisphere was the thing that actually has those abilities, and that the left hemisphere can synchronize with it and get access to its view. I mean, it's just crazy that, like, mainstream science still acts like there's no such thing, even though there's been so much research on it, and like most of it was done by the military and, you know, intelligence services, and they were using it and getting results with it.
Wow.
The goggles.
I put them in the basket in there.
Okay.
I'm like, just when I thought I knew what I knew. So that's like a good place to kind of hone in on. That's the right hemisphere and left hemisphere.
Yeah, I mean, think about this. Everything you experience is through your brain, but you have a half of your brain that experiences the world completely differently than you. And if you can even get a little taste of that, right? Like, have you ever heard of Jill Bolte Taylor, My Stroke of Insight? She was a neuroanatomist who had a left hemisphere stroke, and she experienced what she described as nirvana. She said that she was one with everything was energy, it was just the most blissful experience that she'd ever had. But her left hemisphere during the stroke experience would periodically come back online, and she'd be like, okay, there's a problem, like I need to get help, I need to call someone, right? And then it would go back offline. So eventually she did call someone, she was mumbling, you know, she was having a stroke. She did get some help eventually, but that demonstrates the entire thing, which is there's something in you that already is not suffering, already experiences oneness with the universe, experiences bliss, right? But when that's the only thing that's there, you can't function, right? And so she experienced this dichotomy in her experience, and then during her recovery, she talks about, you know, basically her recovery, her right hemisphere is functioning a lot better. So she got to live kind of a more extended period with that function, and then also learn how to reintegrate the normal functional personality that we usually experience day to day. And her whole thing, you know, after her recovery, writing the book and doing her TED Talk, is like, Nirvana's right next door. Like, you can step to that other side and learn how to step out of like all of the suffering that we normally, the psychological suffering that we experience. And so I'm actually working on a book right now, and that's one of the first chapters is in the theory of like, I'm basically giving evidence for like, this is how it works. And it's like, that's a first person experience of this is how it works, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you look at what the CIA is saying in their, you know, psychic espionage, it's also about the right hemisphere, right? So when you add up all these different components, you can see that in Ian McGilchrist's work, which is very straight edge science, nothing woo in that. It's all research, very well researched. He's a psychiatrist, practicing psychiatrist, and he brings receipts. Like, there's all the studies are in there. And when you see it from that perspective, you see the right hemisphere is like a both and. Like, left hemisphere is binary. It's like either or, either this or that, right? Mm-hmm. Good, bad, this, that. Kind of robotic, like a computer. Mm-hmm. And the right hemisphere is like, no, both and. The right hemisphere is okay with nuance. Left hemisphere, there's no nuance. It's this or it's that. Right hemisphere can see like, oh no, it's this, and there's this kind of in-between area, and it's okay with not knowing exactly what's going on, and it cares a lot about other people. It doesn't see itself as totally separate. It sees interdependence or relationship between itself and the rest of the world. Left hemisphere, it's like me, everything else, right? Mm-hmm. Left hemisphere is like kind of predatory, like focused, goal driven. So it's like, I want this, I manipulate this so I can get this.
Almost.
Yeah, exactly. And the right hemisphere is more like, no, like I'm like interconnected with everything. It's about like relationship. I'm not trying to so you need both views, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is we've just been taken over almost completely like that one view by that one view, and that view is the predator view. And part of how he talks about this is that like 800 million years ago or something like that in the fossil record, there was already this what's the word I'm looking for, this asymmetry in the hemispheres.
Okay.
And he's saying it's because if you're like a dinosaur and you want to eat something, you got to be able to focus at and manipulate, or you're like a monkey, you got to be able to do this stuff,
Yep.
but you also need this wide open awareness so something doesn't come in and get you.
Yeah.
You need to have
Yeah.
both, in the way evolution figured that out is to make one hemisphere have one mode of attention and one hemisphere have the other mode of attention. And so from his book, which is like very scientific, it becomes really clear, like it's the reason it's called the master and the emissary is he's saying the right hemisphere is supposed to be in charge and the left hemisphere is supposed to carry out the directives of the right. And we just live in a world where this thing thinks it's the master and it's forgotten that there's this bigger view over here, and that's why
And we're listening to other people then.
yeah, and it's like, and it's totally like, that's why the left hemisphere sees the world as something to extract from and something to manipulate to get what it wants, and totalitarian governments look the way that they do because that's how we're all machines. We all need to be controlled, monitored. That's the surveillance. Everything has to, keep us in line so that we will like function in the way that they want us to function, so they can extract value out of us, as opposed to this like empathetic, compassionate, like, oh, we're all human beings. Like, let's all like
Work together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the right hemisphere view.
So are we supposed to be using both at the same time?
Yeah,
Or are we
no,
supposed
I
to
mean,
go back and forth?
technically we are using both at the same time. I would just say that the
What's
problem is that
stronger?
which one's in charge,
Yeah.
which
Gotcha.
the wrong one's in charge for
Okay.
most of us. And yeah, both are absolutely necessary. That Jill Bolte Taylor experience that I was telling you about, that illustrates perfectly how, like, do you want to feel like connected and energy and you're one with everything? Obviously, that's great to feel like that. But also, sometimes you need to focus on things and do things, and you need to be able to do that too.
Okay.
In the functional side of it is changed when you have this other view, right? Like, if everyone had both of those, we wouldn't be killing each other and doing all these other crazy things that we're doing. Because it's just being locked into that one, like, I want something, I manipulate, I extract, I exploit.
This makes a lot of sense to me because now I'm feeling like because I've been
I said two.
stuck
It
a
doesn't
little
matter,
bit
Because
in my brain thinking like,
Yes, you take
I did all this work with the brain spine, I was microdosing during that time. It was life changing.
really strong.
And when I kind of like came to, how I put it, I mean, I was like apologizing to my family. I was like, oh, I've been intolerable. Like, I realized. And then, life went on and I am building a business and I have, trying to, survive. And I think to myself, I want to get back to that place. I want to get back to that, like, blissful, like, just go with the flow place. But I think that I keep thinking, how do I reconnect? I got to reconnect it. But I think I am. I think I am going back.
Sure.
And I guess that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and there's different approaches to it. Like, the meditation I do allows you to do that for a set period of time, and then more and more gradually you do it like it's happening just whenever you're out and about. And then there's like the Jungian approach where he's like, basically the ego's not the center of the psyche, right? There's something bigger in you, and it basically, the ego is the workshop to become that thing. And so it's about like dreams are great, right? Like, dreams are oftentimes giving you signs, and they need to be interpreted, and they can be difficult to interpret, especially at first. But I mean, there's all sorts of different, ways, but I trust, you're here, you're doing all this stuff, you're around other people that are into this stuff. I'm sure you're doing the thing you're supposed to be doing.
I think I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I am.
Take off, do not disturb.
Yeah. This is really cool. I appreciate you taking the time and
Hey,
talking
I
to
talk
me.
about this all day. So
Yeah. So do you work with people like one-on-one?
Yep, I work with people one-on-one.
And what would you call that? Like a like a coaching of,
Yeah, I don't have a good name for it. I haven't thought about it lately. I don't even know what my wife runs my website, so I don't even know what it's called on the website. My general way of doing it is, so I kind of have two different groups of people. I see people with health issues and with anxiety where it's almost entirely just breath work. And then I see people where it's essentially like spiritual psychology. And what I'm doing with them is I'm trying to help them build some attention through the reduced breathing exercise and then graduate to like non-dual contemplative practice, which if you don't know what that means, meditation, there's a subject and an object. In contemplation, the way I use the word, there's that distinction of dissolve. So when meditation, you're the meditator, you're observing your breath. In contemplation, that distinction like disappears. Like you're just everything that's there. It's like what she had with the stroke without the stroke.
yep, yep.
So that's what my main thing as I'm interested in is helping people taste that in functionally, and then for small periods of time, and then to build that into feeling it, more. And what I do is I integrate, so that's like the core practice, contemplation. And then I intuitively work with them on, like we were talking about, there's like all these other, like dream work, maybe I might think, this practice might be helpful for you. And it's different for everyone, and it's basically based on my intuition on what might be helpful for them.
And then maybe their goal is, like my goal would be, I want to be operating at my most successful, well, what does success look like, I guess then for me, but I want to be my highest functioning self, I guess would be what my goal would be. So then that would be something I could work with.
Oh, totally, yeah. I mean, and I would say for any goal, really, the number one thing to do is to establish a really firm connection with that other hemisphere. And I mean, firm to the point of like dreams where it's literally telling you what to do. Where it's like literally, not like you're not having to interpret, it's like, look, this is what you do. That's the aim the aim I have is to get people to be able to like actually converse with and get clear direction from. And having some direction is a great start, but you can get to the point where it's like, no, literally this is what you're supposed to be doing, and then you're like, okay, like I'll do it.
I still want to do that.
Yeah. I mean, that's my whole. This isn't on the website, but sometimes I call myself a guardian angel consultant because I'm trying to get you to get clear direction from that right hemisphere about like what you're supposed to be doing.
I love that. So if I would just go on your website and get
Oh,
some,
yeah,
like,
for
schedule
sure,
with you,
for sure.
I'm going to.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Yeah. No, I think this is really cool.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you feel about like stuff like this. Like I'll clip some of this, and
Yeah.
To me, it's because I lived in so conditioned and felt so brainwashed, and I didn't know it obviously until I came out of this. I mean, I literally stood up at my job after 25 years and at a 6-figure salary out of the blue and said, I'm out of here. Because
awesome.
One day after all this work and it was a combination, it was the microdosing, it was the brain spotting, but it just one day connected, and I'm like, this isn't where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I packed up my stuff and went to my boss's office and said, I can't do this anymore.
That's great. I'm so
Before I
glad.
thought I was crazy, but it's led to this. I mean, so I know that that's, I want to be able to show that to people and help people get to that. I think is awesome.
Absolutely.
This is all information that is not, I guess it is available to us, but we don't think to look for it.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Hey, no, my pleasure. Seriously, I'll talk about this anytime.
Yeah, and then do I have you in our Gusto